I've listened to you and I've made changes. Have you noticed? Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I'm going to share with you something that I changed, and it was based on you guys making comments. Yes, I've been getting comments about, you probably shouldn't be wearing that watch and that ring while you're turning. And I've kind of thought, wow, it's not that big of a deal. I've never really had it catch on anything. I've never had any problems with it. But it was kind of in the back of my head. It was kind of nagging me a little bit. And then I started thinking about when I was a kid, and there was the movement to really push and promote people wearing seatbelts. And I remember how resistant some people were. And they would basically say things like, well, I don't need a seatbelt. Why do I need a seatbelt? And the truth is, we don't need seatbelts until we do. And that got me to think, well, maybe I haven't caught my ring or my watch on anything yet, but perhaps I will at some point. So how about if I just try this? So I've gotten into the habit, and if you've seen in my more recent videos, I'm usually not wearing my watch or my ring. I do wear my glove, and that's a whole other topic, and I've got a video that answers that if you've got questions about my glove, so check that out. But I take off my ring and my watch, and the funny thing is that it's not that hard of a habit to start and maintain. Plus, I've noticed, like in the house, when I'm doing regular things, not turning, that I am catching my ring and sometimes my watch on various things. So it's one of those things where you can become overly cautious to the point where you're afraid of turning, and I don't want that. Nobody wants that because you're just not going to turn most likely if you get too afraid of coming to the lathe. But it makes sense to take wise precautions that aren't that difficult and can basically save you a lot of pain and headache and injury. So I've gotten into the habit of doing that, and I simply go and take my watch off and I pull my ring off. But here's the thing, I set my ring over on the counter, and I'm a little nervous that it's going to get knocked off there or lost or something's going to happen to it. So today I'm going to turn a small bowl for my ring. That's going to become its home. It's going to be its habit. I like to have things that are habits that are easy to repeat, that I don't have to think about them. I don't need to use my brain to think, where are my keys? Because I have a bowl that holds my keys, and that's all it holds. Well, actually, it holds my wallet too. So when I need my wallet or my keys, I know where those are. And every time I take them out of my pocket, they go there. So I'm going to do the same thing for this ring. That way I know where it's at. And it's going to make it a little more secure while it's sitting on the counter. Now, here's the other thing. This is a great gift idea, especially for your spouse or someone that has jewelry and likes to take off jewelry and set it down. They too could have a nice location to put their jewelry and then come back to it and put it back on later. So this is a great gift idea, and I'm going to be using a different finishing technique for this piece. It's actually a really quick, easy, and great looking technique, and I don't think I've shared this with you guys on this channel yet. So you're going to want to wait to the end and see what kind of finish I put on this bowl. So I'm going to go grab a chunk of wood and we're going to get started. I've got a nice little piece of black cherry here left over from a previous project that you might have seen me do. I'm going to use the compass to draw the circle. Now this cylinder is, at this point, is a lot larger than I'm going to need, but it's going to make it a little easier having it this size to mount it to the 4-jaw chuck. And from there I can turn it down on the lathe and make it a little bit smaller. But for right now I just want to get a nice cylindrical shape here. Now remember, be careful when you're using the bandsaw. I've got a video all about how to not injure yourself on the bandsaw. You might want to check that out. So we have our cylinder, and I'm going to go ahead and mount this to the lathe, and I'm going to use my 4-spur drive center and the tailstock. And there's a lot of reasons for using this. It's convenient and quick. One of the things I like to do right here is loosen it up, and I'm going to level off what will be the top of this bowl. What you see on the right side is the top of the bowl. This is the bottom of the bowl. The bottom of the bowl is way out of whack, but that's no big deal because we're going to level that off right now. I'm using my 1/2-inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm going to use that throughout this project. This is a relatively small piece. I like to believe that you can do pretty much any bowl turning with a 1/2-inch bowl gouge. Now, if you get really small, you'll probably want a smaller gouge, but
The 1/2 inch does an amazing job. Now, if you get into bigger pieces, it's nice to have a little bit bigger bowl gouge to rough out material, but this 1/2 inch is going to work great for me. So I'm making push cuts here and leveling off the base or the bottom portion of this bowl. And you can see here we still have a high spot and a low spot. Now I just need enough of the center area cleared so that I can create a tenon and a shoulder. Now I've also, which I'm not showing here on camera, is I'm also tightening up that tailstock continuously as I'm doing this. That forward chuck, or the 4-spur drive center, it takes a little while to dig into the material, so you want to make sure that you've got that good and secure, and you'll know right away. It'll come loose and kind of spin a little bit, and you just tighten up the tailstock. Okay, so we've got enough of an area that's cleared away to create the tenon. I'm going to use my dividers to mark the tenon. Now I'm only touching with the left side of the dividers, and I'm trying to make sure that the circle that I scribe is right over the right side. That's a little small. There, you see I moved it over, made it a little bit bigger there. And now I'm going to turn away the tenon area for this. Now this is going to be a little bit different. I'm not even going to shape the outside of this bowl. I'm going to go right from the tenon, and then I'm going to mount this to the chuck. So we've got a tenon, and now I'm going to create the shoulder. And this is going to give me a little bit of depth to work with so that I can actually shape the bottom of the base of this bowl. I get a lot of questions asking me what happens with the bowl when I mount it to the chuck. It's unbalanced or it wobbles. Well, it's kind of funny. We have to think about this for a second. We're basically turning a plant here. This isn't as if we have like a piece of aluminum or plastic or something that's perfectly uniform and even. So it's almost never going to turn perfectly smooth when we go ahead and mount this on the chuck. Now you can see I've got this big nub, or this section that's coming off the tenon. I really need to get rid of that because that's going to get in the way and it won't allow the chuck to close properly. I'm going to be using my smaller chuck here for this piece. So I'm going to turn this away, and then I'm going to need to get that completely off there. So I'm going to use my thin curved pull saw. This saw is just really nice. What's neat about this saw is it removes so little material. It doesn't leave a great big nasty path when it's done. So I'm basically just going to cut that nub off and get it out of the way. And we're going to take the drive center out, and I'm going to put in my 4-jaw chuck. And we're going to mount that. As you can see, I didn't turn any of the bottom of this bowl. Now, here's a great advantage. Now, when you have that question of like, well, why doesn't this turn balanced? When you turn the outside of the bowl and you mount it like we just did, many times when you start turning, the outside shape that you created when it was reversed is kind of wobbly. Well, one way around that to make the outside of your bowl turn true before you start turning the interior of the bowl is to do what I'm doing right here. Mount it to the 4-jaw chuck, turn the outside of the bowl with it in that same mount position. So there's no opportunity for the bowl to move or shift or get mounted just a little bit different. And that's usually what happens. And if you're doing the exterior of the bowl first with the tenon and then you turn it and it's unbalanced, one of the best ways to do it is just loosen up your chuck and rotate the piece just a little bit, maybe 20 degrees in the chuck, and then retighten it. And also don't over tighten your chuck. If you're over tightening your chuck, it could be pinching those tenons and essentially shifting the way the bowl is mounted. But if you do what I'm doing right here and you turn the outside of the bowl, once it's already mounted, it's obviously going to turn true because you haven't moved it at all. Now I'm removing a bunch of this material because I don't need this bowl to be that big. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm just basically using this chunk of material to get down to the small final shape that I'm doing. Now what I'm using here is a shear scrape. I was using a push cut, actually a pull cut from the bottom out, and I'm going to take some of this material away. I don't need this bowl to be that deep. So I'm going to push some of this material out of the way by just making a simple push cut. Now I've got the top of the bowl defined, and I've kind of got the bottom of the bowl defined. I want to make it a little bit smaller at the base. I don't want this base to be really narrow. I don't want it to be wobbly when it's sitting on the counter. I want it to be relatively stable so it doesn't tip over and dump my ring on the floor. So now I'm using a shear scrape here. The shear scrape is a great way to just very subtly, you can see those little ribbons of shavings coming off. It's a great way to refine this curve and this shape and get a really, really nice refined finished edge without removing a lot of material. Now, I want this to be a slightly closed rim, so I'm going to turn the gouge around and I'm going to go from the rim up to the highest point of the exterior of the bowl. And that's going to help make this a closed rimmed bowl. Closed rim means that the rim is narrower than the widest part of the bowl. Now I've got this little edge there, you can see. I'm going to use the shear scrape to smooth that out. It's the simplest way. You're basically just shaving off that high spot. If you keep going in with a push cut, you're almost never going to get a really perfect smooth curve that unifies those two arcs. Instead, you're going to just keep making different passes and you're going to whittle this thing down to nothing. So using the shear scrape is the way to go. I've got a video all about the shear scrape. You definitely want to check that out if you haven't seen it already. So with the tailstock in place, I'm going to remove some material here quickly with kind of an aggressive cut. I don't want to be making overly aggressive cuts once I have the tailstock out of the way. So I'm going to get some of the bulk of this interior removed. And now I'm going to whittle away that connection to the tailstock. And now we're done with the tailstock. And I'm noticing here, I'm really pushing, and that's a good indication that my tool needs to be sharpened. So I need to get over to the sharpening station here. I'm noticing it. I'm going to remove a little bit more material, but then I need to get over there and get this sharpened. Yeah, it's time to sharpen this. You really want to do, what you want to do is you want to go to the sharpening station and sharpen your tool and try to remember when you go back to the turning the way it's cutting. When it's cutting smooth and with the least amount of effort, you want to memorize that. It's a little tricky because it degrades gradually, but as soon as you start noticing that you're applying more effort and it's not cutting quite as smoothly, you really need to get back to the sharpening station and do what I'm doing right here. It's all it takes, a couple quick passes and we're done. It's that simple. So I'm going to define the rim of this bowl. It's very small edge there. I like doing slightly down angled rims. I got a little kickback right there. Now the kickback occurs because the cutting tip was not 90 degrees to the surface. It's really that simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm holding the bowl gouge 90 degrees to the surface and then working straight in. That way the tool doesn't have an opportunity to kick back. So let me get some of this material out of the way. This bowl's so small, there's not a ton of material here, so this should go pretty quickly. I want to check though and make sure I've got the thickness pretty even, and it seems to be pretty even, so that's good. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to remove the bulk of this material going through the bottom of this. Now if I keep making passes here, there's a good chance I'm going to have a thin spot somewhere along the bottom curve or the bottom of this bowl. So instead of continuing with the bowl gouge, I'm going to refine this bottom with a really light pass here. You can see how little material is being removed right there. I'm just shaving that down. I'm going to switch over to my small round nose scraper. You don't see me use a scraper a lot, but this is a great way to use it. Now there's a burr on the front of the scraper. If you apply with a hardened tool here, you apply just a little bit of pressure, you can curve that burr up. And this becomes more of a cutting tool than a scraper. Now I've got a video all about how to best utilize a round nose scraper. You can see here I'm raising the tool rest so this scraper is a little bit pointed down. That's going to prevent this from catching and grabbing. I'm also angling the scraper to the left. And you should be getting shavings coming off this, not just dust, but shavings. When that burr is curved properly, it's literally cutting like a gouge, and you get nice little shavings like that. And it's that simple. I just needed that little bit of the round nose scraper to refine that curve. And like I said, if I kept messing with the bowl gouge there, I probably would have changed the thickness, and it would have been not as nice as just a simple scrape with the bowl gouge. Now I'm going to go take my time and go through the grits and sand this. The interior is too small for my power sander, so I'm going to do this by hand, but I still need to go with the grain across that center. I'm not actually sanding with the lathe on and going across the center, because if you do that, you're going to make various depths. You're going to make dimples in the bottom of the bowl. Instead, we want the bottom inside of that bowl to be nice and smooth. All right, so here is the finish that I'm going to be using for this. This is something I don't use a lot. This is a friction polish. And I'll put a link to this and everything that I use on this video in the description below, so you can check that out. I do that with all my videos, so you can look at the description and see all the tools. So simply, this gets applied. Now, it dries very fast. There's a lot of alcohol in this, so it dries very quickly. So you want to work quickly. So you apply just enough to be on the surface, and then you take a little bit of the clean towel, and you can turn the lathe speed up, and that's where the friction comes in. The friction helps dry that and cure it right on the surface, and it's dry to the touch almost immediately. Now be very careful. I only use paper towels. They're not always the best with a finish, but they also will not get wound up in anything. If they catch on the chuck or something, they're just going to rip. And I never wrap my finger around the towel either. I'm basically just holding it from underneath. But look at that finish, and look at the medullary rays inside this beautiful piece of cherry. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh my goodness. Black cherry just blows my mind, especially when you have just, it doesn't take much. Look at how small this piece is, but it is absolutely gorgeous. So the friction polish, you literally wipe it on, you can turn the lathe up, and basically you're buffing it right into the surface, and it dries almost instantly. Now, I do believe there's a little bit longer curing time, but all in all, it's pretty much dry. Now, I've got this old chuck, and I'm going to shape this to match the outside of this bowl, or rather the inside of this bowl. And this is also where that closed rim helps, because it's actually gripping. If you have an open rim bowl where the rim is the widest part of the bowl, you're not going to be able to get it to grip onto a chuck like this. Take your time. This takes a while. It's kind of tedious because you got to just remove very small amounts. And the first time you do this, typically you remove too much, and then your little chuck is then too small. Then you got to remove it and turn some more, and it can be a little bit time consuming. But once you get it, it's actually really cool, because what we can do is we can actually just friction fit the bowl onto this chuck and finish up the bottom of the bowl. There we go. You can see how little material I removed the last go around, and it's on there very snug. It's exactly what you want. Now, if you don't get a super snug fit, you can use a little bit of tape, and you can tape this to the jam chuck that you're making right now, and just to hold it in place to finish up the bottom of that. Now I'm going to bring the tailstock up here initially just for a little added support, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. And I'm going to use that shear scrape. It's actually a pole cut and then shear scrape to shape the bottom of this bolt. So I'm taking the shoulder down and the tenon, and I'm going to let those become the base of this bowl. Just want to take your time here though. These are very light finishing passes. I'm going to scoop out a little bit of the interior. I need the inside bottom of that foot to be concave. If it's convex at all, then this bowl is going to wobble, because it's going to be wobbling on that foot. So I want there to be a nice rim around that foot. I'm going to sand the sides to blend it in with the rest of it. Then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove some material to shape the bottom of this bowl. And here you can see that I'm going in a little bit more to make this concave. Now the most important thing here, especially when you're mounted like this on a friction cut, you want to make push cuts into the piece. So if you think about what's happening when I'm doing a push cut right here, and I'm pushing into the piece. I'm basically pushing it back onto this jam chuck that I've created. I really don't have to be too concerned with it popping off right here because I'm actually pushing it on. It's when we do the perpendicular cuts across that, which I'm going to do right now, that I want to be really cautious, because if I get too aggressive here and get a catch, I could easily just pop this off the chuck. So we want to go nice and slow, take our time. I'm going to make that just a little bit more concave and make one last pass here. This is a great way to have full access to the bottom of the bowl and get a really clean, turned, finished bottom part. And there we have it. Now I'm going to sand this up and get this nice and smooth, and then we'll apply some finish to it, and we're pretty much there. See how nice that jam chuck is. Now I'm going to do the inside by hand. Now if you notice, I'm not hitting the center here. If you hit the center, you're going to change it. You're going to make a dimple there. I've cleaned out and I've actually sanded across the center by hand, and I'm going to come back in here with the friction polish. You can see it's going on wet. We've got plenty on there. And then I'll take a piece of the clean cloth and then buff that on. You want to work quickly because this will dry fast on the paper towel. Look at that. Look at that. The medullary rays are out there as well. It makes a chatoyance. That's where the shimmer of the light in those rays occurs. It's absolutely gorgeous.
All right, so here's the final little bowl for my ring. It's a very specialized, functional little bowl. It's pretty simplistic. Yeah, I could have made it complex. I thought about making a little post in the center where maybe the ring sat on that, but there's no reason to make this super complicated. It's a simple place that I can always put my ring and know that it's in there, and it should make it a little bit more secure when it's sitting on the countertop. That's the whole purpose of this little bowl. And hopefully you realize what a great, simple project this is. This is also a great beginner project. The steps that you need to do for this are pretty basic. It also brings up a really good point. If you're selling your bowls, I hope that you realize that pretty much all the steps needed to make a really small bowl like this are the same as a big bowl. So you're going to have pretty much the same amount of time in it. Yeah, it doesn't take quite as long to do all the turning and that, but all the steps and the sanding and the processing are pretty much the same. It's really hard to sell these little guys and make money because nobody wants to pay much for these. That's something to keep in mind. But for gifts and for functional things, they are fantastic. Now, that all being said, you could theoretically get a production line set up where you're making these really quickly and doing a nice job with them and potentially make them profitable. But if you're into selling bowls, I've found that the medium to larger bowls do a lot better and they're much more profitable for you. And you're pretty much going to do all the same steps, which is pretty incredible. Now, I hope you like this finish as well. Now, this friction polish is different than most of the other finishes that I use. And the main reason is it's not food safe. I don't plan on eating out of this, and that's not a big deal. It gave me a really nice shiny finish right off the bat, and it dries almost instantly. It needs to set up and cure overnight, but it's pretty much dry and ready to go. It's really a nice fast finish. It's typically used for spindle turnings, decorative things like that, and this is perfect for that. So that is a really fun little tool in your finishing techniques to have on hand, and I like using it for small projects like this. So let me know what you guys thought of this. Leave me a comment below and let me know if you're going to make something similar to this for yourself or for someone else. And leave that in the comments below. If you like this video, do me a huge favor and click that like button. Thank you. And if you're not already subscribing, please subscribe. Check out my website, turntowoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls, from little guys like this to great big bowls. Check it out at turntowoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.